didn't arrive here by accident. Even if your mind tells you this was a random click, something deeper has already leaned forward. Long before logic formed a reason, awareness recognized a signal. This moment did not begin when you pressed play. It began when something inside you grew quietly dissatisfied with repetition, with cycles that loop without transformation. The universe rarely shouts, it whispers, and those whispers only reach the ears of those who are ready to hear without needing proof. Most people believe change announces itself with clarity. In truth, it arrives disguised as restlessness, as a subtle tension between who you have been and who you can no longer remain. That tension is not discomfort to be fixed. It is information. It is the pressure that forms just before a leap. The stillness that gathers before motion becomes irreversible. If you're watching this, it means a threshold has already been crossed. Not externally, but internally. Something has begun to loosen its grip. Old assumptions are no longer holding with the same certainty. The familiar no longer feels safe, and the unknown no longer feels frightening. This is how activation begins, not with fireworks, but with recognition. A quantum leap never starts in the future. It begins the moment you realize that the version of you who needed permission has already dissolved. What remains is attention, presence, and the quiet knowing that this moment is not asking you to change. It is revealing that change is already underway. Why most people never quantum leap. Most people spend their lives chasing outcomes while unknowingly protecting the very patterns that prevent them. They set intentions, make plans, and promise themselves that this time will be different, and yet, year after year, the same reality reassembles itself with only minor variations. Not because they lack desire, discipline, or intelligence, but because the system running beneath their efforts never changed. The mind can want something the identity does not permit. This is the quiet contradiction at the center of human struggle. Consciously, you may reach for growth, abundance, healing, or freedom. Unconsciously, you may still be loyal to an older version of yourself that was shaped by fear, scarcity, or survival. When these two directions collide, the nervous system always chooses familiarity over expansion. Safety over possibility. A quantum leap is not blocked by effort. It is blocked by inner conflict. The body resists futures that feel unfamiliar, even when those futures are desired. This is why motivation fades, why habits collapse, why progress stalls just before momentum forms. The system is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was conditioned to do. Most people try to force change at the level of behavior, never realizing that behavior is the final echo of a much deeper signal. Until identity shifts, action feels heavy. Until perception changes, opportunity remains invisible. This is why quantum leaps are rare, not because they are extraordinary, but because few are willing to release the version of themselves that made the old reality feel normal. Identity is the real technology. Every reality you experience is filtered through a single interface. Who you believe you are. Identity is not a label you wear. It is a system of decisions, memories, and emotional conclusions that quietly determine what feels possible. Long before action takes shape, identity sets the boundaries of perception. It decides what you notice, what you dismiss, and what you unconsciously avoid. Most people think beliefs are truths they must uncover or heal. In reality, beliefs are decisions repeated so often they begin to feel permanent. At some point in the past, often without awareness, a conclusion was made about money, love, safety, or worth. That conclusion became a rule, and once a rule is installed, the brain organizes reality to prove it right. Evidence is gathered, contradictions are ignored, identity remains intact. This is why becoming precedes receiving. You do not wait for the external world to change before allowing yourself to think, feel, and move differently. The sequence is reversed. The moment identity updates, perception shifts. And when perception shifts, reality reorganizes with surprising speed. Identity is the most advanced technology you will ever use. It collapses probabilities without effort. It selects futures before you consciously choose them. When identity aligns with expansion rather than defense, action becomes natural, not forced. Discipline stops feeling like pressure. Courage stops feeling like risk. A quantum leap does not require you to add something new to who you are. It requires you to release the identity that no longer belongs in the future that is already forming. The science of inner alignment. What feels mystical about transformation is often biological at its core. The brain and body are not passive observers of reality. They are active participants, constantly predicting, filtering, and reinforcing what feels familiar. Neuroscience shows that the nervous system is designed to conserve energy by repeating known patterns. Familiar thoughts, even painful ones, require less effort than unfamiliar possibilities. This is why change feels uncomfortable before it feels liberating. When you challenge an old identity, the brain initially interprets it as a threat. Neural networks that have been reinforced for years begin to loosen, while new ones struggle to stabilize. This process, known as neural pruning, is not abstract. It is the literal rewiring of perception. Old pathways weaken, new pathways form. Reality begins to look different because it is being processed differently. Emotion plays a critical role in this shift. The body responds to what feels true, not what sounds logical. When a new identity carries emotional coherence, the nervous system relaxes. Stress hormones decrease, attention sharpens, the body signals safety, and the brain becomes open to new outcomes. This is alignment. Not positive thinking, but internal consistency. At the quantum level, observation influences outcome. At the biological level, perception influences behavior. At the experiential level, identity influences destiny. These are not separate ideas. They are reflections of the same principle across scales. When inner alignment is achieved, effort collapses. Action becomes precise. Timing improves. What once felt like resistance transforms into momentum, not because the world changed, but because the system perceiving it finally did. Ancient wisdom already knew this. Long before neuroscience mapped the brain or physics questioned the nature of reality, ancient traditions spoke in symbols about the same internal mechanics. They did not describe change as accumulation, but as shedding. Not improvement, but transformation. Across cultures and centuries, the message was consistent. The old self must die for the new self to emerge. Mystical texts were never obsessed with behavior. They were concerned with being. To put off the former self, to walk through the narrow gate to be born again. These were not moral instructions. They were psychological and energetic truths, encoded in language that could survive time. What modern science now measures, ancient wisdom described through metaphor and ritual. The idea of acting as if was never about pretending. It was about alignment. When the inner state matches the future reality, the transition becomes inevitable. Identity collapses time. This is why initiation rites symbolize death, darkness, and disorientation before illumination. The confusion was not a mistake. It was proof that the old map no longer applied. These traditions understood something modern culture often forgets. Transformation is not comfortable. It is sacred because it is disruptive. The ego resists. The familiar protests. But beneath that resistance is a deeper intelligence guiding the process. What you're experiencing now is not new. It is ancient. A remembered pattern reactivating itself. The language has changed. The symbols have evolved. But the movement is the same. You are not becoming something unnatural. You are returning to a state that humanity has always recognized as real, long before it learned how to explain it. The death of the old self. every quantum leap requires a letting go that feels, at first, like loss. Not the loss of something external, but the release of an identity that once kept you safe. The old self was never an enemy. It was a solution formed in another chapter of your life. It learned how to survive, how to adapt, how to stay within the limits of what felt manageable. But what once protected you can quietly become what confines you. This is why transformation often carries grief. You are not just changing habits or beliefs, you are dissolving an agreement with the past. The mind resists because it equates familiarity with identity. To release the old self feels like stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. Yet this is precisely the threshold where real change begins. The death of the old self is not dramatic. It is subtle. It happens when certain thoughts no longer feel convincing, when old reactions lose their urgency, when patterns repeat, but something in you refuses to fully participate. This quiet refusal is powerful. It signals that the inner argument is ending. Resolution does not come from force. It comes from clarity, from recognizing that you no longer need to defend a version of yourself built for circumstances that no longer exist. As this recognition deepens, resistance weakens. Energy that was once tied up in maintaining the old identity becomes available for movement. This is not an ending, it is a return of momentum. When the old self loosens its grip, the future no longer feels distant, it feels inevitable. When reality has no choice but to follow. There comes a moment when effort is no longer required to sustain change, not because you're trying harder, but because resistance has lost its foundation. When identity aligns, reality responds without negotiation. This is the point where movement feels natural, decisions feel obvious, and action carries an unusual sense of precision. What once required motivation now unfolds through clarity. You're no longer pushing against yourself. The inner conflict that drained energy has dissolved, and with it, the need to constantly correct course. Behavior begins to mirror intention automatically. Timing sharpens. Opportunities appear not because the world suddenly became generous, but because perception finally became available to see them. This is when synchronicity becomes frequent enough to feel personal. Conversations arrive at the right moment. Information surfaces exactly when it's needed. Paths intersect that could not have been planned. From the outside, it may look like luck. From the inside, it feels like alignment completing its circuit. Reality does not respond to words or wishes. It responds to coherence. When who you are no longer contradicts where you are going, momentum becomes inevitable. The future stops feeling like a distant goal and starts behaving like a present trajectory already in motion. A quantum leap is not an event you force into existence. It is the natural consequence of removing what was never meant to come with you. And when that removal is complete, reality has no alternative but to follow the signal you are now consistently transmitting.